In the previous episode, Carol and Daryl embarked on a journey to find Laurent. Along the way, Janet led her troops to track them down, but Carol used the Amper Serum to take Janet out. As a fan of The Walking Dead, I can't help but exclaim, is Daryl really not worthy of a happy ending? Just as he and Isabel had finally confirmed their feelings for each other, they were torn apart forever. Daryl was lost in his memories.
Daryl.
Huh?
Try it one more time. You're right, it's fried.
Carol could sense Daryl's sorrow but chose not to ask any questions. She just needed to pick up her backpack and accompany her old friend to finish the rest. Daryl had been in France for a long time now. Now that Isabel was gone, the only thing he could do was take Laurent back to America and try to give him a good life. The fastest way for them to return to America was through Carol's pilot friend, Ash. Before long, Carol brought Daryl to the racetrack. It was where she and Ash had landed the plane before, but as they got closer, she grew uneasy. She wasn't sure how to face Ash, especially since she had lied to him about coming to France to search for her daughter.
Okay, look. What I said to him, to persuade him to do this whole thing, I embellished some facts a little.
You lied?
Of course, Daryl didn't know about that either. With no other choice, Carol braced herself and walked with Daryl toward the racetrack. She could already imagine Ash's fury. When they arrived at the spot where the plane had been parked, they found it covered with iron panels Ash had used to shield it. Carol called out a few times, but no one responded. Carol pulled open the door, only to see a thin wire on the ground. It was undoubtedly one of Ash's traps. Carol drew her knife and stepped inside. There was no sign of Ash, but the fact that he'd set up traps was unsettling. Had something happened to him? She searched frantically, her eyes filled with worry. Suddenly, Daryl called her over. There were 2 zombies over here. It was clear that someone had tried to break in and ended up triggering the trap. Just as Daryl was about to take out the second zombie, he realized the man wasn't actually dead. Carol hurriedly asked the man about the plane's owner.
He never come back.
What were you doing here?
We came to find the plane.
It seems that when they landed before, they were noticed by someone, so they came here to try to seize the plane, but they never expected to die here. The man, knowing he wouldn't survive, begged Daryl to put him out of his misery.
I got this.
From the man's account, it became clear that Ash had left the area and hadn't returned. But where could Ash have gone? What Carol didn't know was that Ash went out that night to look for fuel, but never imagined that he would be targeted by a group of zombies. Ash tried to escape, but the path ahead was blocked. Thankfully, he spotted a nearby car, quickly opened the door, and climbed inside. Frantically, he searched for the keys. If he could start the car, he might be able to make it out alive. But luck wasn't on Ash's side. He found the keys, but the car wouldn't start. It had clearly been abandoned for far too long. As he cursed his misfortune, the first zombie threw itself against the car window, with more closing in behind it. Ash thought to himself that he couldn't allow himself to die here. Just as he resolved to burst out of the car, the sheer force of a zombie hitting the door caused it to slam back into him. The impact left him dazed, the world around him spinning as he lost all strength. Within a minute, the car was surrounded by zombies. If no one came to the rescue, Ash's fate would either be to starve to death or to be eaten by the zombies after opening the door. Daryl and Carol didn't find Ash at the racetrack, so they decided to head back to the camp to pick up Laurent. On the way, Daryl couldn't help but wonder what excuse Carol had used to convince Ash to come to France in the first place. Before Carol could finish explaining, Nadine came running up to greet Daryl. They had arrived at the camp. Inside the camp, Cadron was quietly eating his meal while Fallow asked him why he had come here.
Pense à mon frère, Michel. Mes parents, les hommes dans le sud. Tous morts. Tous ceux que j'ai voulu protéger, tous ceux que j'ai aimés, ils sont là. Et pourquoi?
In truth, Cadron was just a lonely, pitiful soul now. He had no purpose and no place to call home. At that moment, the gate opened, and Daryl and Carol walked in. Laurent shouted Daryl's name with joy and quickly ran over to embrace the man who was both like a father and a friend to him.
You're back.
The Clone Wolf, right? That's right.
Daryl's eyes landed on Cadron. This man had been both a rival and an unlikely ally. Daryl didn't say much, instead simply taking Laurent by the hand and walking away. Once inside a room, Daryl broke the news about Isabel's death. Surprisingly, Laurent remained calm. He said softly, "Sylvie and the others from the Abbey all died because of me. It's terrifying to think that they're no longer in this world." Daryl then brought up the idea of returning to America. He tried to reassure Laurent, saying that everything could start fresh over there, but the Laurent who had once eagerly clamored to go to America now hesitated. After some thought, he said he wanted to stay. Daryl tried to comfort and convince Laurent, but Laurent simply said that he wanted to rest and refused to discuss the matter further. After Daryl left, 2 silent tears rolled down Laurent's cheeks. He had no family left in the world. The next day, to find Ash, Daryl brought Carol to the underground bar he had visited before. Perhaps they could gather some information there. Carol was stunned. She hadn't expected a place like this to exist in the apocalypse. It was no different from the nightclubs of the old world, drinking, dancing, gun trading, everything. She stared in disbelief. At this time, several scantily clad women came up to them of their own accord.
Yeah.
They also noticed some of Janet's former subordinates in the bar. That woman was dead, and most of her forces had crumbled. Even Janet's prized Mona Lisa had been brought here. Of course, the audience wouldn't forget that the original owner of this underground bar was Quinn, but that guy was already dead, and the current person in charge was Anna, the one who had betrayed him.
Daryl, Dixon. I heard you were dead.
Not yet.
Make yourself at home.
Anna and Daryl had no personal grudges. On the contrary, she was rather fond of Laurent, so she readily agreed to help them look for Ash.
I did what I had to. Miss Queen. I'm sorry for any, what do you call it? Collateral damage.
Anna's voice caught as she spoke, guilt creeping into her tone. Isabel's death weighed on her conscience. From this, it was clear that Anna wasn't inherently bad. She had simply been blinded by power and money, forced into difficult choices in the apocalypse. At that moment, Carol suddenly noticed someone at the bar trading an oil drum for drinks. She couldn't sit still and immediately walked over. Looking closely at the English letters on the drum, she realized it was Ash's fuel drum.
Ça sort d'où, ça?
2 guerriers nous ont rapporté, il y a 4 ou 5 jours, du temps de la maison mère.
Maison mère.
The Maison Mère they mentioned was Janet's former fortress. If the fuel drum came from there, it meant Ash must have been there too. Daryl immediately stated that he needed a vehicle and weapons. Anna was relatively generous and gave them directly and unconditionally. With everything ready, Daryl and Carol headed to Maison Mère as quickly as they could. This place had once been the stronghold of France's most powerful faction, but now, in just a few days, it had fallen into ruin. The surrounding area was littered with corpses, likely people killed in fights over supplies. A few minutes later, Daryl and Carol reached the prisoner holding area. They suspected that Ash might have been captured and brought here, but the cells were filled with bodies. All of them had turned into zombies. They had no choice but to scan the faces through the glass, searching for any sign of Ash. Carol looked very carefully, afraid that Ash had really become one of them.
No. It's over here.
Carol said this with obvious relief. As long as they couldn't see Ash's body, there was a good chance that Ash was still alive. At that moment, Daryl noticed something suspicious through a window. Outside, dozens of zombies were gathered around a car. This was unusual. Zombies only surrounded vehicles when there was someone alive inside. Even the slightest chance that it was Ash meant they had to check. Without wasting any time, they made their way through the corridors to the courtyard. To draw the zombies' attention, Daryl whistled sharply. Daryl and Carol, the 2 unstoppable warriors of The Walking Dead, made quick work of the zombies trying to close in. However, their limited ammunition forced them to switch weapons, which slowed their pace of clearing the zombies. The open area left them vulnerable to an unending flow of zombies pouring in. Thankfully, they had reached the car and were moments away from checking on the survivor inside. Daryl kicked away the zombies blocking the car door and quickly slammed it shut before more could swarm in. Carol finally let out a sigh of relief, but Ash was clearly in bad shape. He turned his head sluggishly at the sound, confused about where the unfamiliar man in the back seat had come from. Carol's emotions were mixed. Right now, it wasn't about who had helped whom. Their current situation was dangerously dire. Countless zombies pressed against the car, banging furiously on the windows. The noise kept attracting more of the zombies. In this dire situation, even if they gave it their all, it might not be enough to survive. After 5 minutes, the zombies had surrounded the car. Carol and the others could not get out. They could only check on Ash's condition first. Ash was suffering from a concussion and dehydration. While not immediately life-threatening, his condition couldn't be ignored for long. They needed to escape soon, but attempting to break out now would be far too risky. Their only hope was that the storage box inside the car contained weapons. When Daryl finally manages to pry open the metal box, he is stunned when he sees what's inside. There are only special guns and a few anti-serums. Seeing that Ash's condition is getting worse,
Got any ideas?
Not any good ones. What battery? You got any battery left?
Yeah, but this thing's not moving.
Just need to crack a window.
though Carol didn't know what Daryl was planning, she pressed the button to open the car's sunroof. As it slid open, Daryl stood through the gap, holding the injection gun. He scanned the area carefully and quickly located a suitable enhanced carrier. The Emperor serum began to take effect, and Daryl swiftly switched to another injection gun to target the next subject. The zombie soldier in the distance seemed like an ideal candidate. After doing this, Daryl quickly hides back in the car, and Carol then closes the sunroof of the car. All they could do now was wait and hope the Berserker zombies would unleash their violent instincts to thin out the Horde. Daryl had encountered Berserker zombies twice before and had learned that under the influence of the serum, they would attack the nearest living beings, whether humans or fellow zombies, tearing them apart with brutal force. Neither Daryl nor Carol had imagined they'd one day find themselves in such a desperate situation, relying on Berserker zombies to clear their path. Suddenly, blood splattered across the car windows, and an eerie silence fell over the area. Daryl and Carol stayed on high alert, scanning their surroundings carefully. The Berserker zombies were still out there, but from inside the car, Daryl and Carol couldn't see them. They had no idea which window the creatures might burst through next. Daryl and Carol were well aware of the danger posed by the Berserker zombies, so they remained on high alert at all times. Suddenly, the fight was over in an instant, but it had taken every ounce of strength Daryl and Carol had. Ash finally regained consciousness, completely unaware of what had just transpired. Carol pushed the zombie leaning against the car window off. Daryl opened the car door and observed the area for a moment before slowly stepping out. After confirming there was no immediate danger, he turned back to help the weakened Ash to his feet. The sight around them was shocking. The ground was littered with severed limbs and mangled zombie remains, making even finding a spot to step a challenge. Ash was still incredibly weak, so Daryl had to support him as they moved. With many of the zombies still twitching on the ground, they had to carefully step over the bodies to avoid unnecessary risks. Meanwhile, Lauren took the initiative to talk to Kadron. He knew this man wasn't inherently bad, so he asked Kadron why he had been hunting them. Kadron explained that Daryl had killed his brother, driven by a need for revenge. He had tracked them to the Abbey and, consumed by anger, made a series of terrible decisions. In fact, Kadron had also come to realize his mistakes. He had allowed his personal vendetta to escalate into something that affected the entire group, leading to the deaths of many innocent people. It wasn't until he truly got to know Lauren that he recognized the error of his ways. With that, he pleaded for Lauren's forgiveness.
Je t'ai déjà pardonné. Et j'espère qu'un jour, tu le pardonneras aussi.
In that moment, Kadron seemed to find peace. Perhaps he could learn to live a normal life in the future. At that moment, the gates of the base suddenly swung open, and Losung marched in with his fully armed troops. The camp's residents erupted into chaos. Kadron quickly told Lauren to hide, while he grabbed a shovel in case of emergency. They climbed onto a metal rack and hid in a compartment, watching the situation unfold below. Losung had now reached the center of the camp. He addressed the surrounding residents, assuring them that he meant no harm and that they didn't need to fear Genet's soldiers because they had joined the Union of Hope. He explained that he was there to find Lauren, a child chosen by God, who could guide them toward the path to the future.
We sent Laurent to you, at the nest.
He was taken from us, lured away by the American.
Then, we must find him.
Sonia reacted quickly, immediately rallying everyone into action. Having once received help from Lauren, she wanted to create chaos to help cover Lauren's escape. However, Losung didn't give her the chance and immediately called her out, stopping her in her tracks. Losung then ordered his men to retrieve an object from the nearby table. The people closest to the table turned to look and saw Lauren's Rubik's Cube sitting there. The people in the camp hadn't expected their secret to be exposed so quickly. Losung didn't bother to explain further. He had already guessed that these people were protecting Laurent, so he ordered a full search of the camp. Cadron positioned himself in front of Laurent, prepared to fight if necessary. Falou was now in a precarious position himself. He was the one who had helped Laurent escape from the nest, but he hadn't expected Losang to track them down here. Seeing that Jacinta was about to locate Laurent, Falou suddenly grabbed a dagger and rushed out, taking a soldier hostage. Seizing the opportunity, Cadron quietly led Laurent toward the back of the camp. This was the chance Falou had created for them with his own life, and they couldn't afford to waste it. Losang did not notice anything unusual, and he loudly accused Falou of being a traitor. Falou saw that his goal had been achieved, so he simply pushed the hostage out of the way and threw the dagger to indicate his surrender. But Falou didn't bow to Losang. Instead, he spoke up, telling everyone that Losang was nothing but a deceitful liar who wanted to sacrifice Laurent to consolidate his own power and status. Losang scoffed at the accusation and turned to the residents, explaining that he needed Laurent to save everyone from their suffering. He claimed that God might be dead, but they had to find the child to prove that God was still watching over and protecting them.
That's what faith is. If you need proof, you've already lost it.
Falou's words left Losang speechless. Sonia seized the moment and began clapping, and the others quickly came to their senses, joining in and applauding in agreement. Cadron took the opportunity to lead Laurent out. Using the applause to mask their movements, they managed to slip away and escape through the rooftop at the back of the camp, while the others continued their resistance. This was the last thing Losang wanted to see. In his mind, it was all because of that damned man, Daryl, that everything had spiraled out of control. Elsewhere, Ash was brought back to the racetrack. Carol carefully settled him into bed to rest before stepping out of the room. Intending to discuss their return plans with Daryl, Carol and Daryl sat together on the bleachers overlooking the racetrack. Daryl encouraged her to take the chance to tell Ash the truth, but Carol was deeply conflicted. She knew Ash had lost his son, so she used the story of searching for her daughter to gain his sympathy. That lie had hit Ash in his most vulnerable spot, and she felt the truth would need time to sink in. Daryl understood and told her to stay behind and prepare supplies while he went out to gather fuel. Half an hour later, Daryl arrived at the underground bar he had visited before and went straight to Anna. She looked visibly surprised to see him. Although Daryl was skeptical, he still followed Anna further inside. To his shock, he saw Laurent sitting there. He immediately grabbed Laurent, carefully checking him over, completely missing the fact that Cadron was standing nearby.
So I brought him here.
Thank you. How are you? What about everyone else? They alright?
Yeah.
Losang is only interested in one thing.
Daryl instantly understood what Cadron meant. Losang, that scumbag, still wouldn't give up on Laurent. Daryl turned to Anna again, asking her for one more favor.
Again? People are gonna talk.
Although Anna said so, she didn't hesitate to agree for Lauren's sake.